Well, you know how I love an Irish story, and I've got one for you. Clever Tom and the Leprechaun. And this has been retold by Linda Shute and illustrated by her. Look at him. Oh, I'm sure you know a wee bit about leprechauns and the tricksters that they are. Well, let's see what happens in this story. Oh, look at that. That's a little jug full of cider. And there is a little wee person, one of the little people. And I believe that's a little mug. And there's his little hammer to make the fairy shoes. You see, the fairies dance all night and they wear out their shoes. And the leprechauns, being the little people, make and repair the shoes for the fairies. The fairies then pay them with gold. And here is Tom Fitzpatrick sitting outside of his house. One fine day, on Lady Day in the woods, Tom Fitzpatrick took a ramble down the lane. Click, clack, click, clack. He heard through the hedge, so Tom tiptoed closer to take a look. The clacking sound stopped when Tom peeped through the bushes, and in the shadow, what did he see? Why, a big gallon pitcher and a teeny tiny man with a brown leather apron and a three-cornered hat. Up the small man climbed into his wee wooden stool and dipped his little piggin, his mug, into the crock. Then he settled down with his full mug beside him to hammer on the heel of a fairy-sized shoe. By the powers, thought Tom, it's a leprechaun. If I catch him and scare him, he'll give me his gold. Since I'm a clever fellow, that should be simple. Before the sun sets, my fortune will be made. Tom stared at the leprechaun and tried not to blink. He knew that if he looked away, the old man would escape. Then he crept up quite near and tipped his hat politely, saying, "Good day to you, neighbour. Blessings on your work." "Thank you kindly," said the small one, but he never looked up. He just kept on tapping at the heel piece of the shoe. Tom moved his hand closer while he smiled very sweetly and said, "Today's a holiday. You shouldn't have to work." The leprechaun frowned and answered Tom sharply, "If I do, that's my business and none of your own. Instead of pestering me, young man, you ought to be watching your father's fields. Look there. The cows have broken into the oats. See? They're knocking the corn all about." Cows in the cornfield? Tom's head started to turn. But he wasn't fooled by the leprechaun's trick. Quickly, he grabbed the sly fellow and cried, "Now you're my prisoner. Tell me, where is your gold?" The leprechaun wiggled and twisted and whined, "I'm just a poor man." But Tom held him fast. "You and I both know you're lying," said Tom, and he made a fierce, frightening face. Finally, the leprechaun quit squirming and said, "Tom Fitzpatrick, you're too clever for me. I see you're after my buried treasure. So I'll have to show you where it's hid." With his eye on the bitty man locked in his fist, Tom followed where the leprechaun led. He traipsed over a hill, under some hedges, through a ditch, across the peat bog. At last, just when Tom feared he'd been hoodwinked, which means tricked, he found himself in a great field of weeds. "Dig there," said the leprechaun, pointing to a bush. "Deep under that bowlin is where I buried my gold." "Thunderation," said Tom. "I need to fetch my spade, but when I return, I'll be lost. There are 40 acres of bowlins here. Each plant looks just like the other one." They do. Still watching the leprechaun, Tom figured out a plan. He tied his bright red garter This was before elastic was invented. It held up his socks. He tied it right there. He tied it to the bush. Swear, you old rascal, that you won't take this off while I go run back to get my spade. That I will promise you, the little man said. Tom grinned, knowing leprechauns always keep their words. Now, since I've shown you where my treasure is, I don't suppose you need me any more. No, said Tom, my fortune's made. You may go, and good luck go with you. Then goodbye, Tom Fitzpatrick, said the leprechaun. May you do much good with what you find. Away Tom ran as fast as he could, figuring out how he'd spend all the gold. Then he came back with the shovel in his hand, back to the field of bowlings. But when he got there, lo and behold, a red garter, just like his own, was tied to each and every bush. The leprechaun promised not to take off the bow. He didn't promise he wouldn't put one on everyone. They were on every bush as far as he could see. Tom dug under the bowline where he thought he tied his garter. But nothing was buried under that bush, and so he dug another. He dug to the east, and he dug to the west, and still he found no treasure. The harvest moon rose as he dug to the north, and it set as he dug to the south. When the sun came up, Tom saw he dug over 100 holes, and tired Tom Fitzpatrick knew he couldn't find that gold. So he gave up and headed for home. From then on, Tom always carried his spade with him, and he never stopped listening for the tapping in the field. Every chance he got, he'd tell how he nearly found the gold. And since I'm a clever fellow, Tom would end his tale, the next time I catch that leprechaun, I'll have my fortune made. Excuse me. And look who's right there, listening. It's the leprechaun. And there's Tom Fitzpatrick. His hair is white. Very interesting. The leprechaun got the best of him. Now it says in the back here, there are some facts about leprechauns. They're now called leprechauns, are solitary fairies. They usually are discovered by the tapping sounds they make mending the tiny slippers as they sit in some lonely spot behind a stone wall, in a hedge, under tree roots, in an old tree stump, or in a ruined castle. The fairies who dance on moonlit nights sing sweetly and dance holes into their slippers, and the leprechauns have to repair them. So they're tricksters. As a trickster, they cannot be outsmarted. And typically, a leprechaun will escape by blowing dust into someone's eyes to make them blink, or by distracting them so they look away. No one has ever managed to cheat the leprechaun out of his gold. Well, I hope that you might hear some tapping, because the leprechauns are here in America, and who knows, you might see one, you might catch one, you might be the first one to trick the trickster out of his gold. Happy St. Patrick's Day.